This is Fit to Ride, physical preparation and rehabilitation for jockey performance. I've seen many of these presentations. They're fascinating, and I think for anybody who's involved in the industry, you'll want to know more. Professor Giles Warrington is going to facilitate this. He's going to step in here in a moment. He's the Chair of Human Performance and Innovation in the Department of Physical Education and Sport in Limerick. The first presenter will be Dr. Kylie Legg from New Zealand, a PhD in investigating the physiological demands of jockeys in relation to injury, risk, performance and career longevity. She's going to stand here as soon as I step down. She'll be followed by Dr. John O'Reilly, the sports science consultant to Hong Kong. We saw him yesterday. He'll be looking at the progression from 2020 to now and how things have changed. He'll be followed by Taryn Mason. We've lost her, but we're going to need her back, the Chief Operating Officer in the South African Jockeys Academy, as we've just seen, to be followed by Dr. Michaela Keener from the US, an assistant professor in athletic and clinical nutrition. She'll be looking at the balanced decisions we make with riders. That's going to be followed by Danny Haig from the UK, Sports Science and Strength and Conditioning Lead for the Injured Jockeys Fund, and he's going to be looking at the outcomes through injury and how the rehabilitation takes place through the injury. And then we'll have Gavin Egan, who is the Strength and Conditioning and Physiotherapist for the Irish Injured Jockeys, and also looking at injury prevalence and falls and the development back from the injury through to back to race riding, but how that fits with the development as well. So if we could invite our panel forward, Dr. Kylie Legg is going to make her presentation, followed by the rest, and then to be facilitated by Giles Warrington. Thank you.
Okay, so I think we're ready. So hi, I'm Kylie. So we're hearing from New Zealand now, which we haven't heard too much from. So I'm sort of doing my presentation. You probably are all pretty well aware of the physiological demands of jockeys. We know they work really hard, but there are a bit of a differences between whether they're doing track work riding, trials riding and race riding. So I'm having a bit of a look to see if we can find a distinction through physical testing or any other sort of testing which we can use as a baseline licensing procedures for our jockeys. So are they race ready or are they just riding, or are they riding to keep themselves fit and get fit? So taking a step back, we need to look at what they're doing in each of their riding activities. So it's pretty well studied. In track work, we know it's fairly low intensity work, similar to going for a jog, especially once they're used to riding. And we had a look at what muscles they're using. And when you look at that top video there, that would be a track work rider. And you can see they're using muscles in their whole body, their lower body, their core, and their upper body to absorb those oscillations of the horse every time they're taking a stride. Moving up to trials, obviously they're working a little bit harder. The horses are going faster. Their stirrups go up a little bit. And the muscle use moves back, so they're using their lower body and core more. And then in the races, we know that it's maximal effort. They're working as hard as they can, and if you look at the video in the bottom, you can see his centre of mass of the jockey has actually moved forwards. So that means that they're using a lot more of their lower body and their quads, and they start to dominate. So when we're looking at our physical tests or our strength and conditioning tests, we need to know what we want to concentrate, whether we need to get them riding fit or race riding fit. So we also found in our tests that as they move through the race day, the quads activation actually starts to decrease. So this is either within a race and throughout the race day if they're riding multiple rides. And that could be due to a number of reasons. So in the push towards the end, okay, and their core activation starts compensating for the decrease in activation of their quads and their lower body, and due to a bit of fatigue. So we need to know what we need to strengthen in our jockeys. We also had a wee look at putting accelerometers on different parts of the jockey's body, and I got AI to draw me these little graphics down the bottom. And so the one on the little white one there would be what we might expect to see a probationer, and you can see the head bobbing along with the horse. So we want to kind of prevent that. So we know from a lot of sports, especially like cricket and things, cognitive function, and this probably relates to our concussion discussion previously, cognitive function sort of is better with a steady head, and they're better reaction times and better decision making, which is really important during a race, which only lasts a minute or so. Moving into the middle one, what would be what we would hope an apprentice may be, sort of lower head oscillation there, moving to our senior jockeys on the right with the quite a steady head. And we can actually measure this in our jockeys. So the graphs just show the slopes, The middle graph there is just accounting for the speed of the horse. So obviously as the horse speeds up from a canter to a gallop, or even increases its gallop speed, the gait flattens out. So we need to account for that. We also need to account for how hard the jockey is working. So if they're working a bit harder, so again in that push towards the end, or if they're getting tired, they have a higher exercise load, okay, and then their head movement starts to increase. So we can use this as a bit of a blunt tool to see how hard our jockeys are working and how prepared they are for race riding. So other off-horse tests, we don't always want to be testing our jockeys on horse. Some of the just really simple tests that we can use that have a discrimination between experience levels. We had this simple test, like you can see in the picture at the top there. They just had to maintain the race riding position for 4 minutes without moving. And what was it was developed to sort of measure the endurance, balance and lower body strength of the jockeys. And as you can see, those stirrups are hanging loose below the saddle horse, so there was nothing to grip against. So it was a bit of a test of balance. But as you'd expect, all of our senior jockeys that did that test, they did it really easily, and they assumed a much lower position than our apprentice riders and our probationers who stood much higher in that more track work position. So that sort of gave us an indication that our senior jockeys are much more comfortable in their race riding position because they obviously ride more races than most of the apprentices that we were testing. The other test that had quite a big disparity between experience levels was the reaction time test. So in our jockeys that were currently riding in the top 20 in the premiership table had much faster reaction times than all of the other jockeys that we tested there. So those are just plots showing the differences that we saw. So as you can see in the top plot, the probationers in the saddle test, there was a wide variation. Some could complete it, but a lot couldn't. Most of our apprentices could complete it and all of the seniors. So it's really sort of a drafting gates for coming into an apprentice program. So if they have the dedication and the sort of experience that they might want to be able to complete these things, then it's a good test to see if they want to come in. We know that traditionally in New Zealand anyway, and maybe in other countries, most apprentices and most jockeys rely mainly on just riding and stable work to maintain their fitness. So we've done a lot of work to introduce structured physical training, and I think a lot of my panel will talk much more on that, and how important it is to have this off-horse training to complement their riding, that they may not be doing enough race riding to get up that race riding fitness. So we can use a lot of these tests and a lot of what my panel members will be talking about later to help sort of show their progression as they become more fit through riding. Thank you.
All right, hello everyone again. So maybe just bring you back a little bit to what I spoke about yesterday and the number of studies and research projects I was involved in, say from 2012 up to 2020 and just beyond. We learned a lot of information about what was going on with jockeys, maybe where maybe they needed some additional support. But at the same time as I was conducting those research projects, I was also involved in elite sport elsewhere in terms of professional football and involvement with the Hong Kong Sport Institute. So I was aware and involved with a lot of the elite provisions in terms of strength and conditioning that other elite athletes were getting. And at that time, it was evident that the riders of the Hong Kong Jockey Club were not receiving similar support. So that's where I had a conversation with them, and we thankfully, and I bring you back to Mr. Harding's comments yesterday about their commitment to developing or providing some additional support for the riders. So I just want to maybe bring you through a little bit about that and what we've done over those subsequent few years. So basically what we wanted to do is change what was going on before 2020, when at that point really, the riders were asked to fend for themselves. There was no dedicated sports science support. There was no one for them to talk to. They relied on external clinics. If they wanted to, they could go to this physio or that physio or that clinic, and they were reacting to a problem that had happened. And that really isn't how elite athletes should be provided for. So what we did at that point was we came up with a plan, and we kind of integrated training and sports science support in terms of strength and conditioning, physios, and tried to get the athletes and I call them athletes, as robust as possible, as fit as possible, as strong as possible. We're not going to deny that injuries happen. We're not going to deny that problems happen in sport, but when they happen, you want to be as resilient as possible to deal with that. So that was the idea. And then, of course, when the injury happens, which of course it always does, the return to ride is structured, and the athlete and the jockey in this case is aware of what's going on. So with that in mind, the Jockey Club has since 2020 done a considerable upgraded facilities that they have available, and I don't think we're anywhere near perfection, but at the same time we've been moving in the right direction over these past few years. And what every jockey goes through is a basic strength and conditioning assessment. So what we do is conduct, general, I guess what I would call sport-specific assessments in terms of grip strength, forearm strength, flexibility. We look at a little bit of upper body muscular power, lower body stability, maximal aerobic capacity, all tests that are very rudimentary to any other elite athlete, and none of the riders had done these before. And I guess that bar chart, what you're looking at there, that's basically, a league table. Every one of those bars, those blue bars, is a jockey's performance. The red bar on the extreme right, if you can see it, is the mean of the group. So every jockey knows where they stand. It gives me an opportunity to see who's strong where, who's weak where, and provides me with a little bit of evidence to provide back to the jockey. Okay, this is where maybe you should improve a little bit. This is where you're doing well. You don't need to focus so much on this, but how about that? And they respond very well to that. And following this information, then there's a guidance and there's a support about what you need to do and how you need to do it. And then the Jockey Club have provided the facilities where they can do it. So I hope there's a video going on here. I hope I can play it. I don't know how the AV is going to work, but basically what happens here is that there is facilities on site for the riders to be able to use. And so what we have here, maybe I don't know if I can pause it, but there's a couple of graphics there. But there's aerobic, there's motorized treadmill, non-motorized treadmill. Maybe I'll get out of the way. Okay, I'll stand over here, it might be easier if you can hear me. So yeah, this sled track is used. Keith is coming in later. I'm told he's going to wear his top. Hopefully he is. But this is not performative. This is what goes on every day and probably going on right now in the Jockey Club. You can see there's, again, top off, but it's okay. But we have plenty of yoga, Pilates, flexibility, weight training, you name it, it's there. So the idea is that the jockeys are aware of where they're strong, where they're not so strong. The locker room facilities are absolutely world class. This is a little bit behind the curtain. This is the gents' locker room. Cold plunge, temperatures down to 12 to 14 degrees. This is for recovery. Steam room again. And I don't want to jump on what I said yesterday, but I absolutely encourage the use of saunas, steam rooms for therapeutic use. There's a cold, hot soak pool up to 40 degrees in there. All of this is what elite athletes do every day. The jockeys' rooms themselves, extremely well kitted out. And some of these riders have very long days. Early starts, track work, late nights at Happy Valley. So rest and recovery is extremely important. So again, Jockey Club have provided sleep quarters, facilities, quiet rooms, dark rooms. So whatever the jockey needs, it's provided for them in Shatin. So anyone who doesn't have the chance to get there over the weekend, this is again the female locker room, all very similar. Holly's coming later on this afternoon. She hopefully will be able to explain a little bit more about the facilities that she sees. She'll have a good maybe comparison between what goes on overseas and also in Hong Kong. They have the sauna, steam room, things like this. They have a cold plunge. So that's a little bit of a run through very quickly, and bringing it, I guess, full circle in my area as a registered nutritionist as well. The riders need to be able to fuel following the exercise they do. So this is an example of some of the on-site nutritional provisions which have been significantly upgraded over these past few years as well. Everything is portioned out, everything is cooked appropriately, everything is cooked to order. And again, the culinary differences between the various people in Hong Kong or ethnicities in Hong Kong are provided for as well. So basically what we're trying to do is test the jockeys, see who's strong, where, provide advice to them about what they can do and provide facilities for them about where they can do it. So I guess just quick summary, I'll get out of the way and let the other panelists talk, but basically we've moved from everything external with no sports science support pre-2020, but lots of information about where we can provide support, and then moving towards a kind of preventative approach, prehabilitation, if we can put it that way, so that if someone is injured, they can be as strong as possible. And in fairness to the Jockey Club, I have to say they have put tremendous investment and support in hardware and software and specialists. And again, our physio is coming later on and he'll be able to speak a lot more to that. So yeah, I'll leave it there and thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to speak at this year's conference. Today, I'll be presenting on our Fit to Ride protocols, covering our unique academy model, the evolution of our programs over the past 15 years, and key initiatives like fitness requirements, dietary support that have transformed jockey health and safety in South Africa. First, a bit about why the South African Jockey Academy is so unique. We offer a 3 to 5 year residential apprenticeship program combined with full secondary schooling, grades 10 to 12, at our main campus in Durban. Our apprentices live on campus in a safe, supportive, and fully supervised environment. This closed campus model allows us to provide complete education, rigorous training, and daily health monitoring all under one roof. We have a national reach with satellite campuses in Johannesburg, Cape Town, and Port Elizabeth, ensuring we can support our young riders across the country. This holistic approach isn't just about riding skills. It's about building resilient, well-rounded athletes. Let's talk about the reality before 2010. South African horse racing was about a decade behind other professional sports in the country, such as rugby, soccer, cricket, and soccer, in terms of athlete support and overall evidence-based development. Jockeys often lacked structured physical preparation, rehabilitation, or even basic health monitoring, leading to higher injury risks and inconsistent performance. But over the last 15 years, we have made tremendous strides. It started in 2010 with concussion management and return to sport protocols. In 2011, we introduced strength and conditioning along with rehab programs. And by 2012, we began postgraduate research on topics such as weight loss effects on mood, cognitive function, and heart rate variability. 2013 brought the development of our multidisciplinary team, honors internships, and more research, which has followed by the establishment of fitness requirements and body fat testing in 2014. As you can see on the timeline, the momentum continued. In 2015, I was honored to present my master's study at the ICHSWJ conference in Hong Kong with the focus on injury and illness surveillance. And in 2016, we opened our own research arm, the South African Jockey and Equestrian Research Institute, for enhanced research, including DEXA scans, hydration, and weight studies. Partnerships with universities in 2017 brought internship programs, and by 2024, we introduced hydration testing, vestibular rehabilitation, weight management protocols that led to the individual minimum riding weights, and we published our first publication on accurate body fat determination. These steps have professionalized our sport, aligning it with global standards. As mentioned, we introduced fitness testing in 2014, along with the establishment of clear track and race riding fitness requirements, making me the most unpopular person in the industry. However, it resulted in significant improvements in apprentice safety, resulting in a 40% reduction in overall injuries in just the first year. This in turn led to a 35% reduction in concussion cases, allowing our apprentices more time in the saddle, and most importantly, keeping their young bodies and minds protected. Routine collaborative evidence collection resulted in us having a better understanding of the primary mechanisms of injury and where our apprentices were most vulnerable. Weekly weigh-ins and dietary consultations with monthly body fats and hydration testing led to the introduction of individual minimum riding weights, where apprentices manage realistic weight expectations without resorting to harmful weight-making strategies. What's next for South Africa? We are incredibly proud of the support we provide for our apprentices. However, our professional jockeys currently have no equivalent support. Unlike the UK, Ireland, Hong Kong, Australia, and Japan, SA riders compete without dedicated facilities. After years of engagement with owners, trainers, breeders, and industry stakeholders, we have the green light. The new Centre of Excellence will deliver state-of-the-art gym and strength conditioning, physio, rehab, and sports science labs, mental wellness, support, and performance psychology, recovery zones, and education. This is a game changer for us, as apprentices and professional jockeys will finally have the opportunity to train side by side, resulting in a natural mentorship, a stronger jockey community that will translate into longer careers, fewer injuries, better performances, and retain and attract top talent, where South African jockeys can finally be on equal footing with the rest of the world. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Michaela Keener, and I'm an assistant professor from the University of Kentucky in the United States. Somehow the only person from the United States actually on any of the panels. So I'm just going to be talking about the balance decision and really working with the jockeys to build our research program. Unlike every other country, we don't have a single apprentice school. Our jockeys aren't required to go through a training program, so there's no single spot for me to see even half the jockeys that we have in the United States. So from a research perspective, I've heard a lot of people talk, or I've had conversations about trying to engage the jockeys in research. They're asking us why they need to engage. This is an additional thing we're asking them to do on top of everything they're already doing. Trying to make weight, exercising horses, trying to maybe see their family, balancing everything they have. And so part of that is working with them, informing them, but also having them be part of the conversation of the research we're engaging in. When I first started at the University of Kentucky, we were being pushed to have the jockeys and exercise riders come into our lab. It was a facility that was built for them. We got a one of the Racewood galloping simulators. We could do balance testing, strength testing, but that was an additional thing, asking them to come into a lab after races or on their day off. And so the first 6 months, I only saw 6 jockeys. And a year later, we were lucky enough to work with the local track, Keeneland, to actually have access to the jockeys when most people did not have access to them during October 2020, during COVID protocols still being in place. And what we saw was actually a 6-fold increase. We had 37 jockeys participate in just that first 4-week meet. We were there 3 days, that's all. And we were doing different balance testing, but during that time, we started having these really important conversations with the jockeys. We were building those trusts. And before I started, my colleague was able to go to one of the Jockey Guild assemblies, and the riders told us they felt like safety in horse racing was bullshit. And they were honest about this. And as researchers and clinicians and organization officials, this is not what we want to see. And so since then, we've seen HISA come into place, and we've seen the research increase significantly. But some of those conversations, probably should have been maybe part of the concussion panel, but what our jockeys were telling us kind of resonates with what we heard in this group before us. They're really concerned about the specificity of the test, the sensitivity of the test, the time to administer, and that language barrier, especially in the US, where a large proportion is speaking English as their second language. And so part of those discussions was also talking to them about what they thought mattered in their performance. And one of those things was reaction time. They thought they could maybe react if their horse tripped, but obviously it depends if it's a rotational fall, clipping heels, or the horse was injured, they felt it, and the horse's gait changed. So we brought out a Dynavision 2 board. We almost dropped this off the moving truck twice, so not a very easily portable device at all. And we thought we were doing really well. We wanted to test reaction time. They wanted us to test their reaction time. So we tested them in their stable standing position, and then they really liked the unstable positional test that we'd done the season before. And they came in and they actually hated part of this test. And what they hated is when they're in their position, they don't look up. If they're looking up, their race is over or something's wrong. They're falling off the horse probably. And so they felt like everything above their eyesight didn't matter. And then they thought, okay, what about peripheral reaction time? To them, this is not peripheral reaction time. This is peripheral reaction time, especially down in their position. So we went back to the drawing board, and we came back the next semester or the next season with this horseshoe-shaped protocol. And we've gone through 4 iterations of this with the jockeys now. They have told us which types of reaction time tests they've used. At first, a few jockeys say, it's not fast enough. It's now fast enough. It has a simple and a choice reaction time option. I had one jockey who the device is now named after literally pulled 2 lights off, saying, we don't need lights here. These don't matter. But that same jockey brought other jockeys down to have conversations about what needed to change and be added. So we've also added different balance tests, eyes open, eyes closed, stable, unstable surfaces with accelerometer data. And so this is the iteration I can show you. We're building a newer, better iteration that for intellectual property reasons I can't show you. But it's really changed how the jockeys interact with us. And this is a great quotation of James Graham. The device is named after James. It is called the Graham. And here he says, the work they're doing here is incredibly important. I've seen so many injuries during my career. Some of us are literally pieced together after all of our injuries. But this is one huge step in the right direction to ensure my community is safer and healthier than ever. So really my takeaways from this is it's been huge to have field-based research, data collection, but also having those conversations with them about what they feel like matters to them. It gives them autonomy in what's going on from a research aspect, which means they're more likely to engage with us. So, thank you.
Hi guys, so the topic of my discussion today is outcome-focused rehabilitation, start with the end in mind. So I think for all of us who work with jockeys in a rehabilitation setting, an important question to ask first is what demands will be actually placed on the athlete when they return to competition. If we have a thorough understanding of the biomechanical, physiological demands, we can then essentially reverse engineer the process and work backwards to where they are now currently, and then put in place really robust building blocks to optimise their performance and return to sport. So to be outcome focused, we need to understand the demands. So we know that jockeys can be exposed to in excess of 2.7 times bodyweight forces through the stirrups, which requires a lot of muscular effort from the lower body, typically in that quasi-isometric position. We also know they have to maintain a really well-balanced body position, which requires a high amount of core stability and strength. Recent research from Kylie has shown that muscle contribution in race riding, to summarise, typically is about 50% comes from the lower extremities, 30 from the core, and 20 from the upper limbs. So the lower limb and core really are where it's at when we're trying to develop physical preparation for jockey athletes. In terms of physiological demands, it's a very demanding sport. It can be classified as a high-intensity sport, where jockeys will be exposed to high physiological strain during competition. So typically we know heart rates are 80 to 95% max and can peak at 190 plus in the end of a race. Also, due to that quasi-isometric nature in the legs, we get high lactate buildup, so there's a high anaerobic contribution as well. How we approach it at the IGF, really, we take a science-informed approach. We see injury as an opportunity, actually, to develop an athlete holistically, not just focus on the injured body part. So for me, a nice quote for us is rehabilitation is just physical preparation in the presence of injury. This is where our physical profiling comes in, actually. If we can develop good baselines on our jockeys prior to injury, this can really inform our decision-making and return to play markers. Very, very fortunate at the IGF, we have 3 facilities across the centre, all with fantastic practitioners that work together as a multidisciplinary unit to optimise the overall health and well-being of our jockey athletes during that rehab pathway. We take a very criteria-led, data-informed approach. Very fortunate that we have sports science diagnostic equipment, such as our fixed dynamometry with our force frame, and our force plate technology. This allows us to be very data informed but objective with our measures, where we can put the different building blocks in place that jockeys can get past criteria and earn the right to progress through that rehab pathway. So just to provide a bit of context with the lower limb example of how we might approach this with, so in the early phase of rehabilitation, here we're probably just looking at developing tissue tolerance. Hopefully this video plays. Yeah. Here we're looking at more low load, high volume strength training, usually with the application of blood flow restriction training as well, if that's warranted, because this can really kickstart that early phase of rehab. Some of our outcome measures in this case is the more capacity based. So we're looking at things like single leg squat capacity, hamstring bridge capacity, things of that nature. And we also use some isolated muscle testing on the force frame just to see if we've got a good base level of strength for that athlete to then earn the right to progress to the heavier phases of training. So what that might look like next is really targeting more high load, high force strength training in more joint relevant positions. This is where our force plate technology comes in, where we can assess more position specific strength, such as the isometric squat at 90. In terms of some of our training interventions at this phase, we'll be doing heavier isometric holds, things like that, both in a bilateral position, in a unilateral position, so on one leg, and also, because this was a lower limb injury, some dynamic calf work there on the flywheel. Moving on in sort of that return to performance phase, this is where we're going for the icing on the cake stuff really. This is where we're looking at power and rate of force development. Some of our diagnostic tests here again, a high level strength testing, but also we start looking at the counter movement jump here on the force plates, looking at how effectively that jockey can take off, decelerate and land through their lower extremities, keeping those asymmetries hopefully to a minimum level. Some example training interventions here might be a ballistic isometric squat, where there's maximum intent to produce force quickly. We might pair that with a plyometric activity, something like a reactive hurdle jump here. So that's just to really develop that reactive strength and power. A little example of what we might do for some position-specific conditioning in this phase. Here we've got Durant on the equisizer doing a 4-minute interval, 10-second cantering, 20-second push, but we've also got blood pressure cuffs on his legs. So not only are we going to get really high cardiovascular load here, we're going to get peripheral muscle conditioning as well. So getting good bang for your buck from a tool such as that. So yeah, Duran had really good return to play markers here. So his KPI in the ISO squat, he was capable of producing 4.5 times body weight at the end of the rehab with a minimal asymmetry of 6%. His counter movement jump hit the markers we needed. He also had a high watt bite score of 5 watts per kilo, which is above that of average professional male riders. Just a little example of what our unilateral testing is here, the knee ISO push. So it scored really highly in this as well, but this more looks at strength around the knee and hip complex, whereas ankle and calf complex, we do the same test but with a straight leg. Okay, so everything's quite objective and data informed. Once the multidisciplinary team are happy that the jockeys hit that criteria, this is when we send our diagnostic report off to the Chief Medical Officer at the BHA, Jerry Hill, and it's him then who makes the final decision on whether a jockey returns to race riding or not, with our data and also the medical data that he gets from consultants and what have you. Thank you very much.
Hello everyone, my name is Gavin Egan. I'm a physiotherapist with the Irish Injured Jockeys, and I work in the rehab clinic, but also I work on the race course along with the Injured Jockeys, along with the Jockeys Accident Fund. And today I'm going to talk about a case study just like Danny, but ours will be in multi-level spinal fractures and the rehab pathway that we used. So in 2025 we had a jump jockey who had a fall, and he had multi-level injuries from mid-thoracic into his lower thoracic and also into his lower back. So the early considerations before rehab that we would always look at would be his level of mobilization. This jockey was in a neck brace for 2 weeks, but was in a back brace for 6 weeks. The deconditioning that he might have had if he had a long stay in hospital, which he did. Pain levels before coming into our rehab service, along with his access to service if he's able to drive and meet and come to our service. And any sort of previous history that he might have in terms of his injuries. So why this is important to us, our clinic has only been working for the last 2 years, but in that last 2 years, vertebral fractures make up about 30% of all the injuries that we see. Multi-levels in the first year was about 2/3, last year was down to 1/3, and there's a high clinical burden on this injury. Most injuries are 12 weeks plus and require full MDT involvement. Some require surgical intervention which have their own challenges. And there is a psychological and social aspect to these injuries. So the early management of this jockey came to us at 3 weeks post. So in the early stages, we were just working on pain management, either with prescribed medication or soft tissue, working on brace education, and we start our early compound lifts and movements in the brace, all very much low load, just getting the jockey introduced again, and then we commence that brace-based rehab. And how we accomplish that is we maintain upper and lower limb function, that would be S&C with physio-led. We target the posterior chain and shoulder girdle. We'd start core activations in the brace as well. And we would start, in this case, we start deep neck flexor and extensor endurance test or strength. And we'd assess their ability to do some home rehab outside the days of clinic. So this is a checklist for our early phase. The big one there would be the consultant review at 6 weeks, which will determine when they come out of the brace. So the mid-stage, the jockey would have come out of the brace, did come out of the brace at this stage. So our role really is to support the wean from the brace, as described by the orthopedic consultant, and begin active range of motion as allowed, and add in exposures to functional movements with or without the brace. So how we achieve that is we start our trunk and pelvis conditioning and stability and muscle endurance. We use our force frame to start working on some neck strength, and we start more so endurance, so at low levels of their maximal volume contraction based on baseline or norms. And we increase the S&C involvement, so we start targeting our functional lifts and compound movements and increase the energy system demand. And then we would start to develop proximal spinal load, progressing away from midline and then underload. So again, that's just a checklist. I won't go through it for time, but then underneath that we'll have our trunk capacity markers that we hit based on McGill's trunk endurance testing and some of the athletic development KPIs that we've kind of started to take over the last 2 years around our squat and our bench press and our bench pull. So when we started initially, after about 6 months, and so a year and a half ago, we went and started doing a lot of testing days. So we went around a number of tracks and had jockeys come into us. So we targeted hip and groin and shoulder. We also targeted the C-spine and the isometric mid-thigh pull. So we didn't have the jockey's baseline in this case, but we were able to take the means based on 27 national hunt jockeys for his C-spine testing, and the isometric mid-thigh pull we had 33 to be able to inform our rehab decisions on when we returned them. So the late stage or end stage, so our rehab objective is to regain full functional range of motion, regain proximal load under control and true range, and start a graded return to running, axial loading, loaded rotation and plyometrics. And then a graded return to riding out, and firstly simulator, then riding out, and then return to race riding. So the targets there will increase the load on our force frame. We progression to full usage of upper and lower limb S&C. We introduce axial load, which is load down through the spine, which is quite important for our spinal fractures. We again progress our trunk and pelvis conditioning, consider falls trainings, and we do multiple consecutive days on simulator training to add in a little training load before going back to riding out, and start lower limb plyos. And we allow 24 hours between each, because this is quite a heavy stage. There's a lot of new exposures that we give a jockey based on a consultant review. So we allow 24 hours between any new exposure. So just some of the riding, specific rehab, we do an awful lot of endurance holds and exercise and riding positions. We integrate the simulator into more or less every single physio session. So for our jump jockeys, we target 6 minutes in total in the stirrups, which is based on a 3-mile condition. But it's just a minute canter and a minute in a push position, and we do 3 whip usage, and we do it 3 times, and slightly different for our flat jockeys. This jockey was able to start riding out first in the sand gallop in race, which is very beneficial before going back to work. Kind of manages the kind of acute chronic load of going back into a work riding condition. And then ideally we want our jockeys to go and have 7 days consecutive riding out before returning to race riding, because each day is very different in terms of what their day works in a riding out. So this is just, again, the checklist from that end stage. And kind of like Danny's last slide, this is what we would present to Jennifer Pugh to be able to say that he meets these criteria to return from our side. And so the jockey was able to meet all the first three, our isometrics, then our endurance tests, and then some of our KPIs. And he did manage to meet his back squat by the return date, but that would be quite normal for our spinal fractures, because usually jockeys would have a low training age, and you'd only start to integrate axial loading towards the very end of the rehab process. And thank you very much.
Thanks, SJ. First of all, thanks to the panel, a really international panel we had here. It's our biggest panel of the 2 days. So we saw perspectives from 6 different countries. I'm actually delighted the stage is full, because it means I can stand and walk around. As a sport and exercise scientist, I like to move around a bit, which kind of helps me a little bit. I think you all filled your brief really well. You all stuck to time, which is fantastic, so it made my job very easy. I was going to ask a question around take-homes, but I think you've all done that very well. So I think my first question, which I'm going to ask each of you to respond to, is around this question of fit to ride. What does that mean to each of you and your countries from a physiological perspective, from a rehabilitation perspective, but also a longevity perspective? So what does fit to ride mean to you? Carly, you might start there.
Hello? Okay. So fit to ride. So like I said, it's completely different, the track work riding fitness from our race fitness. And at least in New Zealand, we don't have great protocols in place to assess the difference between that. So we've got some good fitness testing that have been established recently, but a lot of our jockeys use race riding to get fit to ride in races, which is not really where we want to be. So we've seen some great work from England and Ireland where they actually have those KPIs and stuff in place to make sure that they are fit to ride in races. And we've seen from a lot of research has been done saying that those jockeys that are fit to ride and have that race-specific fitness are less likely to fall off, less likely to get injured, and they're going to have longer careers. So it's definitely worth investing in it to become fit to ride. And I think, putting those protocols in place and just baseline procedures or tick points, so it's not just somebody's sort of opinion on, yep, they look good to go, but they have to tick the boxes.
I mean, I totally agree with what Kylie said there. I mean, it's kind of the how long is a piece of string type of question, and there's no one global metric by which you either pass or fail. If we're talking about rehabilitation from an injury, obviously, depending on what the injury is, we have to assess whether it's healed or not initially, whether the bone has been, a broken bone is no longer broken, etc. But from our point of view, I guess, speaking just from my perspective in Hong Kong, we have much fewer jockeys, therefore, by nature, we have much fewer injuries. So what we're trying to do is have jockeys as fit as possible in terms of strength and conditioning and in terms of their physical well-being to get out there and do their job. So, I mean, if a jockey is fit to ride, I guess essentially you're saying, have they passed the minimum requirement to enter that race? So in essence, that bar is extremely low. And I don't think really when we look forward, we should be trying to say, okay, let's everyone see if we can pass the minimum requirement and then everything's great. But essentially, that's what fit to ride is. If you can pass the minimum requirement, you're fit to ride. But I think we should be striving for a much higher bar than that in general.
No, I agree with both of you guys too. In South Africa, we have a very different situation at track riding. Our apprentices can ride up to 20 horses a morning, which I think is the most globally. So to be able to actually sustain that and not fall, it's really important that we do implement fitness requirements. Like I said, I was very unpopular when I did it, but I think I was very passionate about it. I thought it was a great idea. The students didn't think so much, but now looking back, I mean, what are we now, 13 years, it's made a huge difference to the jockeys and the apprentices, because they now consider themselves as elite athletes. I mean, when I started at the Jockey Academy, I had 0% attendance for gym sessions. You know, they just didn't, it was always the horse that was considered the athlete. But since implementing fitness requirements, they now see themselves like the South African Springbok rugby team in South Africa, which is a big up and a big pro for us.
In the US, we're very far from having any sort of fit to ride protocol. I mean, we were very excited to get all of our jockeys having to have a baseline in the last 2 years. I mean, that we're really behind, and my colleagues from the US will probably say the same. So I'm mostly looking around at all of you to be like, what can we do and how can we start implementing something to make it safer for our jockeys?
Danny and Gavin, I might get you to look at it just slightly different perspective from a return to play point of view, fit to ride from return to play.
Yeah, I think in its most basic sense, to me, it's does that jockey have the underlying physical competencies and athletic qualities to tolerate the demands that are going to be placed on them in their competition? And if they do, then happy days, they're fit to ride. Obviously, it's not as simple as that, but and that's why we did our physical profiling initially to try and get a baseline of what a jockey athlete looks like. And we've collected a lot of data from all the different codes and cohorts, and you start to establish some norms, and then from that you can start making more informed decisions. So, yeah.
I'll echo more or less the exact same thing. Like in terms of returning from an injury, having normative data and having robust outcome measures will be the be all and end all of it. But I suppose the challenge is racing. It's the sport-specific phase of racing towards the end of the rehab. It's very hard to replicate that in the gym. You know, we did the walk-by test as well and worked them on the simulator, but there's nothing that replicates racing. So rugby and football, they'll be reintegrated back to sport, and in rugby they would have, they'll play for 40 minutes and you'd be on a 40-minute time clock for your first game back. We don't have the benefit of that. I think it's probably the issue, I think, and probably some area that we can work on a bit better.
Gavin, I'm going to stay with you. Traditionally, as service providers and practitioners, we'd be very siloed in our approach, multidisciplinary teams, but working very individually. So how is interdisciplinary support working in, say, the Irish system? Are you working with the other service providers, or is it very much you at the coalface?
No, it's myself, Wayne, our S&C, we have an AT, and we work very closely with Jennifer. So Jennifer is typically there once a week within the IJF clinic. So the jockeys have access to her, and we also have nutritional support that's there once a week, and there is psychologist support, and there's an educational officer that there works as well within that jockey pathway. So the jockey pathway is who we all fall under essentially. So it kind of mirrors very similar to what I've been used to previously working in the UK.
That's good to hear. Danny?
Yeah, I'm very fortunate at the Injured Jockeys Fund that we have fantastic multidisciplinary practitioners who work together on a daily basis in our centres. So yeah, it's very much a shared decision-making role. So everyone's on the same page. We all know we've all got our own sort of individual expertise, but it's a collective group that works together to ultimately return.
How's that changed over the last 10 years?
Yeah, well, I've always been at the IGF, so I'm quite, for the last 10 years.
Seen the change then?
Yeah. I've seen the change. I've seen the improvement in our sports science diagnostics and things like that, which has helped with our informed decision making. I suppose in my previous role, when I just worked in a university S&C setting, it was probably that old classic S&C meets physio, tug of war, boom, boom. You're killing them, I'm trying to rebuild them, but it's certainly not the case now. We're all pretty much on the same page, and it's all about developing the jockey athlete holistically. So yeah,
Michaela, a very different story, I think.
Yeah, I mean, being a researcher, I more recently got to add a sports psych PhD student to my team, and I have one other colleague who is only 25% of her effort goes to the equestrian athlete program. We're working with all equestrians. Our jockeys are only in Lexington about 6 weeks each year, and so my team is very small, and we're trying to do all of the things
Yeah, so we've evolved quite a bit since 2013, since our first implementation of our MDT. I think one of our big positives in the last 10 years is stakeholder buy-in. Initially, it was quite hard to have trainers and quite understand what we were doing. I mean, I would have beep tests going on, and I'd have trainers come and watch and say, why are they running? They're not runners, they're horse riders. So the education element and just educating the stakeholders was a really positive way forward.
Yeah, I mean, nothing too much different to share, only in terms of, in Hong Kong we have the physio on site, we have personal trainers, we have chiropractors, we have masseuse, we have obviously Karen providing some psychological support as well. But at the same time, for us, it's about the education of the jockeys, providing information to them about what they should do, what they can do, where they can do it, and how they can do it. And as I was talking to Andrew earlier, it's encouraging them to take ownership of their responsibility to do that. And, they're all individual, professional, elite athletes. And like any other sports, it's about the personal drive and the personal motivation. And what we really want to do is to continue to provide the best quality support for them in terms of the hardware and software, so that they can then maximize and optimize their opportunity for their performance. If they don't do that, well, in fairness, that's probably on them. And I think in Hong Kong, certainly they're providing and continuing to provide excellent support for the riders.
Kylie?
Yeah, so in New Zealand, we've been really lucky in the last few years, especially since I started my research, and the apprentice jockey program is changing. So we are starting to integrate all of these different things, the nutritionists, the falls protocols, concussion policies, and it's all sort of changing now, and they're trying to concentrate it in a centre so the jockeys will know where to go. And if we can sort of integrate it from the very start of their journey, like when they first enter racing as a probationer, as an apprentice, and it becomes the norm for them, then it makes them easier later in their life to be able to reach out to those support networks, and it changes, like we've heard throughout this conference, it changes their attitudes so they can take responsibility for their own journeys. And I think that's what we need to change.
I think traditionally, in the early days, the jockeys didn't see themselves as elite athletes, but I think virtually all of you have said that they are elite athletes. Now, John, you obviously work with a range of different athletes in different sports. So what do the physiological profiles of jockeys look like compared against other sports? Clearly, it's a very unique discipline, but how do you summarise it if I put you on the spot?
No, it's okay. And, it's interesting because I was very pleasantly surprised when going back, I don't know, 10, 15 years, the very first time I did some VO2 max, maximal aerobic capacity tests on the riders in Hong Kong, and actually compared it to some of the work that you had done at your time with the riders in Ireland, and also compared it with some other work for athletes in other sports. And in Hong Kong, the athletes there were very favourable in terms of their aerobic capacity, but then at the same time, we need to be sport specific about the type of tests and physiological assessments we do on horse racing jockeys. It's not a long-term steady state aerobic sport, so actually a VO2 max test is not really very sport specific. So the test that we are doing on the riders is high intensity interval training, their ability to high power output and be as explosive as possible and be able to recover as quickly as possible. As we have seen the other day and we'll see on Sunday, there's half hour in between a race, and it's very high demand sport. So the physiological profile of the riders in Hong Kong, riders in Hong Kong, to your question, I would say is high intensity output, good quality recovery. But at the same time, I think musculoskeletal health is an area that needs to improve relative to other elite athletes. And that's where I would say is probably the one area that I would like them to improve better as we continue to assess them going forward.
Any of the other panel members want to comment on the physiological profiles? Danny?
I think they're excellent athletes. The ones I've assessed, they've got exceptional levels of lower limb relative strength, very, very high lower limb relative strength. Especially Holly, if she's coming in later on, ridiculous off the charts. And to the other guys, I've said, if you don't make it as a jockey, become a professional cyclist, because some of them have absolute engines on the watt bike. So, they are exceptional athletes in their own right. So, yeah.
And one thing I'm interested in is you've all talked about different protocols and procedures. Now, a lot of sports would have standardised protocols. So, the Australian Institute of Sport would have ones that we commonly use, let's say sports like rowing. Is it realistic we'll ever get to a stage where we have like an international standard protocol? Now, obviously resources is going to be a challenge, Any thoughts, comments? Just I'll open it up to the panel. Anybody want to come in there? Is that something we should aspire to, or should we just work as individual countries? John, you think you want to come in there?
Yeah, well, I mean, if you're talking about a jump jockey riding 3.5 miles, or you're talking about a sprint jockey or a flat jockey riding for 50 seconds, you know, that's not the same physiological demand. So I don't think we should be judging those riders, you know, on the same metric. So yeah, in an ideal world, we would have global standards and we would have minimum thresholds that we can all talk about and we can all test under the same protocol. But we're a long way off that for a number of reasons in terms of different jurisdictions. And actually, you know, we're all here because of the horse racing industry, but within horse racing, there's different demands. I don't think some of the flat jockeys would be able to sustain the demands of a national hunt race the same way, and it would be vice versa. So I don't think there's a one size fits all, but hopefully we can come together and have a little bit more collaboration on that front.
Yeah, I would agree that globally it's hard. When we look at how jockeys move, even in flat racing, from the US versus Ireland versus Australia, they all move very differently on that horse. I know that a lot of the European jockeys, when they come over to the US, they almost have to learn how to move on the horse again because they're told not to move as much. They're keeping their legs more still and moving more with their arms than their whole body that you see in the Irish and British racing.
I think collaboration's key. So the more we can actually learn from one another, the better, because it's about the jockeys at the end of the day and the best support services we can provide for them. I agree with John. I think there's subtle differences in the energy system demands between jump and flat, but where I think we could have a good consensus on is our neuromuscular profiling. Certainly with the use, I'm not trying to sell force plates here, but they are very, very informative, and we can get really in-depth neuromuscular profiling on jockeys in very, very sport-specific positions. So that's where I'd be.
I've got a rake of questions here, but I'm not going to hog the floor. I'm going to ask one more, then I'm going to open up to the floor. Taking your words, Danny, from your presentation, starting with the end in mind. So future thinking, Gavin, where should we be striving towards? We've made tremendous inroads in the last 20 years, but there's obviously plenty more to be done. So from your own perspective as a practitioner, where should we be moving towards? What one thing would you like, an initiative you'd like to bring in to further advance the fitness to ride of jockeys?
Well, I suppose I can only speak of Ireland and the jurisdiction that I'm under. We're you know, it's only been 2 years. There was no rehab centre 2 years ago. There was no rehab pathway. There was no prescribed rehab where a jockey would come on multiple days and receive the same level of care that they would have done in the UK. So I was very fortunate to have worked in the UK and seen how they run. So we are not in our infancy. We've come a long way within the 2 years. But I think we need to strive a little bit more at that end stage part of the rehab to keep the jockey engaged, because where we probably lack is the consultant will clear them in terms orthopedically, and then to keep that jockey in and try to convince them for the last week, 2 weeks afterwards, that you're better off in terms of your load management to be able to continue with us, work on power, work on different other metrics, and I think that's probably where we would work.
Danny?
Yeah, I think we've come a long way over the last 10 years. And when we've got them at the centre, you know, we can really manage their workload all the time. But when they're back race riding, that's a different animal altogether. So, and you do see a lot of the guys and girls now wearing the wearable technologies, the Whoop bands and things like that, which I just think if we could tap into that a bit better and support them then when they are fully back on the horse, when we're not going to see them as much, it'd be more around that workload monitoring. I don't know what that fully looks like yet, but that's an area I'd like to explore.
Michaela?
I think we need to just start working on building a pathway to support our jockeys after an injury. We're still in the very early games of supporting our jockeys through that rehabilitation process to get back to returning to ride.
Taryn?
I know we've tried it very hard, but maybe more international collaboration. I mean, these conferences are absolutely amazing, and every time we come back from them, we learn more and do more. But as you are aware, our population sizes with jockeys are very small. So when it comes to research, I mean, I have so many postgraduate students interested in research. So it would be so nice to tap into other jurisdictions. But yeah, we have come a huge way in the last decade.
John?
Yeah, a bit different from my perspective in terms of, you know, from talking to a lot of the panelists here and to some of the other delegates over the past couple of days, it seems like, you know, the specialists or the therapists get to see most of the riders when they're injured. Whereas in Hong Kong, we see them every day and hopefully nobody's injured. I mean, in an ideal situation for us, nobody's injured and we're really busy. That's what we want. So going forward, we would like more of that. And, you know, in terms of what I'd like to see happen in the future, I would like to see more uniformity in terms of the buy-in from the riders, in terms of the training protocols that they endeavour in, or, you know, because sometimes the traditional approach is long-term aerobic output to make weight, and we're still working towards a place where we have to get as sport-specific as possible with the idea of what are the physiological demands of the sport you're going into, and let's train as specifically as possible so that you can be prepared for that. So, you know, hopefully we can continue to move in that direction.
Thanks, John. Kylie?
Yeah, so I'd agree with all the what we've heard before, but especially the concept of the race riding specificity, especially like our jockeys in New Zealand are very time poor, and I think they are all over the world. And so when they do train, they need to be training for something useful. And I think with the AI and the new technologies and the wearable technologies, if we can empower them to have control over their journey, so they can get instant feedback, and then they know their pathways if they need extra help, then that will go a long way to sort of increasing their safety and their careers.
We have a few minutes for some questions from the floor. Mike.
I promise you I'll be brief. To try and do 35 years again in 30 seconds, from where Tom's father into today is simply unrecognisable. But John at the end, who's rapidly becoming the Sky Sports player of the match at this rate, I've seen the changes in Hong Kong in 4 years, which has been remarkable, from almost a shed really 4 to 5 years ago into what the jockeys think now. The work of Lisa and I was formerly a trustee of the IGF, the most remarkable organisation, and there's me promising to be brief. James mentioned powerful narratives. If I can summarise 35 years, the power of a powerful narrative has no equal. The science and the data, the knowledge in this room is extraordinary, and it's uplifting and humbling to be part of it. But the strength of a powerful narrative to get buy-in is all. And every day, if you can get something out there about the powerful narrative, because you've done two things, and the IGF have in particular, Danny and the team, Gavin when he's in the UK, you've made concussion uncool. And Tom, you've made it uncool. It's uncool to ride when you're basically drunk. But it's really cool to be fit. And Holly was one of the pioneers in the UK. That's a remarkable athlete with a lower leg strength, etc. But if you can make fitness and specificity, there I've said it, cool, and make it even cooler, you're onto something. Because I think that the collaboration when you hear around the world, make it cool, make being concussed uncool, and make being fit cool. And I think that's where you're going, because the knowledge here is... This is as good as I've seen. I'm going back to the Premier League on Monday morning, and I'll report back how good this is. And they like themselves in the Premier League a lot. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. Jennifer.
Yeah, thank you, Giles. Really fascinating. I'd echo, really, is all I'm doing, echoing much of what Michael has said. We have seen among our jockey population in Ireland, which I think is very much led by the senior riders buying into the programme that you're trying to advocate. I've seen a sea change over what I think is a relatively short period of time, where now it's cool to be seen training hard, working hard, pre-race preparing much better, diet-wise as well as physical exercise-wise, and I think it's peer-led as much as anything else, and I think that's all very much based on what you guys are demonstrating and bringing. So I think I really think we've seen massive developments over quite a short period of time, and I congratulate you all on that work.
Just a brief comment, because Andrew has given the Irish perspective. It was just nearly all of you said, we're really lucky we got the IGF, we're really lucky we got this. But that's not luck, that's really hard work by people like you up there pushing and driving for this, for your charities, for the regulators, for everybody in horse racing, the governing bodies who are supporting the vision and the jockey buy-in. So I suppose, Michaela, keep going, okay? Look what's happened. It takes people like you. So to congratulate you, I've thoroughly enjoyed this panel. I think it's exceptional, so well done.
We're keeping you busy, Elaine.
Thank you. In terms of the Injured Jockeys Fund, we've been on this journey for 15 years, so we've been lucky in that respect, and Gavin and Danny are really important parts of our team. We've got the 3 centres across the UK, which is fantastic, but as we know well, it's still difficult to get hold of all of our 600 jockeys who are migrating every day across the country. In terms of the next step for the charity and for the Injured Jockeys Fund, what we will be doing very shortly actually is putting a sports and exercise medicine consultant at each of those centres. So they'll be at the very top of that pyramid, which we hope will provide the next level of expertise. So Giles, in answer to your question, said what's the next step? For us, it's that level of SEM at the very top.
Excellent, thank you.
In terms of, I suppose, injury specific, I know this is not specifically about injury and it's just fitness in general, but do you think there's any value in, I suppose, liaisoning with trainers? Because obviously jockeys are under a lot of pressure, not just to return to ride for themselves, but for their trainers and for their opportunities and everything. And that pressure can kind of put more a strain on them. And is there any, I suppose, scope for linking with the people that are looking for those jockeys to come back to relieve them of those phone calls and when are you back and how much longer? It can be quite stressful for jockeys.
From my perspective, that's a great point, Katie. All trainers are slightly different. In Malton, where I'm based, we've got a really good relationship with the surrounding trainers, and to be honest, they've bought into kind of what we do, and they know if one of their jockeys comes to the centre, they're in good hands. However, they've still got owners saying, when's he going to be back? And so, yeah, there's pressures everywhere, but we will sometimes step in if it's what the jockey wants, and one of our physiotherapists will contact the trainer direct. We'll have a nice conversation, sometimes even get them to come in. Just so that we're understanding that everyone's under pressure. And I think that helps sometimes. Takes the pressure off the jockey, especially a young apprentice who might be scared of the trainer. So we can step in and help and just, soften the blow a little bit.
Yeah, it's obviously the biopsychosocial part of an injury is always a challenge, whether it be jockeys or anyone else. But we're at the stage now that a lot of our jockeys will be cleared from an orthopaedic and be cleared from our side. And what they will do is they'll ride out. They won't tell anyone that they've been cleared, and they'll ride out in the sand arena in race or ride around the sand gallop, and use that as a way to build themselves back in. Because again, the demands when you go back into a racing yard, particularly, if you're fit, you're fit, and if you're not, you're not. And to go into a racing yard to talk to a trainer and say, do you mind if I ride 2 rides or ride out twice today and 3 in 2 days' time and 6 the following week? It's just not a feasible thing. So that's how we manage it.
Okay, I've got eyes burning into the back of my head, but I'm going for 2 more questions. Kevin, and then Wayne. Okay.
It was once said to me that pound for pound, jockeys are the fittest athletes in the world. Now, the work you all do with the jockeys, the fitness and other work and that, would you agree with that comment?
It's a good point, to be honest, and it'd be a good argument, but, having not assessed every other sport, I couldn't categorically say yes or no, but to maybe follow on from Giles' initial question and agree with the lads here earlier, they are extremely well-prepared athletes, and their ability to produce what is demanded of them at the right time is exceptional. So all I can say is, pound for pound, obviously, they have an advantage there in terms of what they can do, but at the same time, yes, I I would agree they definitely are in the hunt for that particular title, I would say, because they are, whatever's demanded of them, from my perspective in Hong Kong, they can produce when asked.
I won't ask a question, so you're off the hook. A byproduct of creating, say, a rehabilitation program or having, say, the gym environment is really links back into what we spoke about yesterday in mental health, is that they can come in somewhere and they can be themselves. They're not getting judged. So a jockey can come in and offload whatever they want. And if that's the only reason to go into the gym, yeah, that's great, because that's a touch point, and then they can increase their speed and their size and get fit to ride, etc. But I think what we've noticed in our setup is that people just come in and they're just chatting and they're getting fit at the same time. So it can be forgotten a lot of the time because we're so driven on our data and our science that when someone comes in, they're just coming in to have a little chat, and that can lead on to something else then. So it's like a byproduct of being fit to ride as well. So
it goes back to Michael's point about the connections, the communication being very important. So just to wrap up then, something that was mentioned today and earlier on is about being evidence informed. And evidence is often talked about as science and papers. So there's evidence-based practice, but there's practice-based evidence as well. So the knowledge and experience. And we have world-class practitioners working within the sport, and we should applaud them for the work that they do. So thanks, everyone.